Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and Tekken 2, which I look forward to. So, why Tekken 2? Because out of all of the Tekken games, whether they be main entry or spin offs, Tekken 2 is my favorite. It's the one that I return to the most. I have a lot of fond memories of it growing up and even replaying it in recent years. I even replayed it before I watched this because, I wanted to. Before I made this, that's what I meant to say. um, so, anyway, I'm going to talk about Tekken 2. I'm going to talk about the gameplay, which is, let's be honest, the core of it. And I'm going to talk about the math involved in said gameplay and the game as a whole, a little bit about its history, and my experiences with it. So, let's get into it. Let's rock. Oh, also, before we rock, spoilers ahead, I might mention a character that, shows up at the end of the arcade mode. It doesn't really spoil things too dramatically. There's not really much of a story in game, but for those who are extra cautious, keep it in mind. Um, Now that being said, let's rock. Okay, so with Tekken 2, it is a 3D fighting game, which a lot of you all watching, no doubt, knew. But I wanted to mention it because it came about at a time where that was a relatively new thing, right? Like we went from 2D and we crept right into 3D, and it was just I wish I had an idea back then just how like crazy special that actually was. It was just like that was a thing. It was like I was a kid, that was happening, and it was just like okay, cool. But looking back, it's like whoa, that's insane, right? So anyway, with Tekken 2, it is a 3D fighting game, and the objective of the game is to beat your opponent, right? That's the main objective. Like it's dishing out damage while trying to not take it. And if you're into combos, dishing out as many as you can, right? Um, so, with that in mind, right off the bat, there's math involved, right? And not only because it's the second entry in the series, but uh, yeah, so there's math in like the health, um, because even though you may not see the numbers directly, the idea is like the health bar is a visual representation of what's going on. You're starting off at 100% health, right? And you're going down to zero. Or rather, your opponent is starting at 100% and you're knocking them down to zero. Whatever the case may be. But there's math and that essential premise of the game, right? And not only is there math in the health and like taking it away versus not taking the damage, there's math in the amount of combos that you could do. There's math in looking at what your opponent is doing, seeing if they're trying to start like a combo or a grapple or if they're trying to block. And there's math in you trying to perform those actions yourself, right? There's math in the timing, all right. So with the combos, it's not just the amount of hits, but also the timing, and you want to be able to like read your opponents. And there's math in all of that, and there's math in how these characters are designed and how they move, and there's math. Sorry, um, there's math in how everyone is proportioned, right? And there's math in how everything is set up on the screen. If you're playing arcade mode, you're going to see which stage you're on. In most modes, right, you're going to see how many rounds there are. In the center of the screen, you're going to see the timer for the match, right? Like for that particular round. Um, and the thing is, right, you can set it to infinite or infinity, whatever you prefer in this case. And the idea is that then the timer won't go down. But other cases, it's going to go down, right? You might have a minute, you might have 30 seconds, whatever the case may be, anywhere in between those things or around those things. But the idea is time is a factor, right? And going back to some of the features that I was talking about surrounding the match, not only do you have to deal with the health, but you're dealing with the time. like I just mentioned, in the amount of rounds, which you can set in options for different modes. And if you're playing the arcade mode, um, you're going to have like 10 matches where you have 7 regular ones, then a sub boss, then a boss, and that boss's final form. So 10 stages overall, um, with those last three being special. And so that's pretty cool. And for the arcade um, version in general, right? Like, so back in 1995, the initial arcade mode happened, right? And then in 1996, about a year later, the PlayStation port of the game for Tekken 2 happened. That sounded redundant, but whatever. Um, and so there's math and taking what you did on that console and making it work for, you know, that sorry. There's math in taking what worked in the arcade and then transferring that to the console, right? Because with the arcade, you're dealing with a more powerful system with more memory, and so you're gonna have to consider the specs of, in this case, the PlayStation and the memory that it has and what it can handle, and making sure that you're able to adjust accordingly. And there's math in all of that, right? There's math in how everything is coded up. And in the case of the arcade, you know, you're spending money and you're deciding what you want to do, right? Like, do you continue if you lose? Do you keep on going and going and going? Depends on how many quarters you have, right? But there's math in that and how the game is designed to pull you in. In the console version, not so much an issue. You buy the game and then you're done, right? And with that console version, not only did you get the arcade. Oh, jeez. In the console version, not only are you getting what worked in the arcade version, but you're getting new modes. And it's worth stating that with Tekken 2, it introduced some new modes that would become mainstays in the series. Because in addition to arcade mode, you had survival mode added, you had practice mode added, team battle added, and timed battle or time attack added. And there's math in all of that. So to start, let's say like the time attack, right? So these consist of battles like you've been doing, but the idea is to beat things as quickly as you can and break past records. And there's math in that. And because there's math in the timing, there's math in your strategy, there's math in trying to upstage your record or someone else's record if they're playing on your console. For survival mode, it's interesting because, like in a normal match, right? Let's say traditionally you'd have a match and there's like 2 rounds. You can, you know, change that number, but traditionally, right? So let's say you have that, right? With survival mode, it's different because like in those matches, you fight round one, someone wins, someone loses. You're back to 100% health at the beginning of the next round, right? With survival mode, you're pitted against the AI. You're fighting the computer, and each round you're carrying over the health, so it doesn't reset. You might get a little bit more, but you're not going to necessarily get back to 100, right? And so you're going and you're defeating as many opponents as you can. If you lose that first round, you're done. If you win that first round, you keep on going and going and going. The idea being like, in theory, it's infinite, right? So with that in mind, there's math in that and how that all functions and how that all flows. And then there's team battle, which you can do 1 member up to 8 members. And team battles function differently in different games. But here the idea is, you're doing these one-on-one battles with your team, and each time like someone on your team loses or someone on the other team loses, it gets scratched out. Like the character gets scratched out, and you keep on going until someone is the victor. Um, and so there's math in that, and how it functions and how it flows. And then there's the idea of practice mode, right? Like where you have consequence-free way to own your skills, to practice your combos, to look at how the characters move, and get a good sense of everything. And there's math in that. There's math in the time you invest. There's math in the combos you're performing. There's math in the idea of you're not losing health, right? You're again, it's consequence free. And at the time, I don't know if Tekken 2 was the first game to introduce practice mode, but it was certainly an indicator of things to come because that would eventually become pretty standard, right? So there's math in how that all functions. Um, and then there's math in the characters themselves. You know, like there's math in how tall they are, how wide they are, and how they're proportioned. And there's math in how they're animated and how they move. Each of these characters, they're practicing different martial arts, and there's math in depicting the differences between those different types of martial arts and character to character. And there's some where it's like they move pretty normally, and some where they move pretty weirdly. So I would say like Jun Kazuma, my favorite Tekken character, like she would have like human motions if that makes sense. Like she has her own style, much like other characters do, and she moves in some like kind of superhuman ways, like again a lot of characters do, but still human. But then you get a character like Yoshimitsu, where if you're playing that game for the first time, you're not sure what his actual deal is, and he moves very weirdly. And I think it's fascinating that some characters can do things that others can't, or there's like some trade off, right? And there's math involved in all of it. And back to Yoshimitsu, I think that's an interesting character because he's doing some weird things where some other characters can't necessarily do. Like, there's a few characters, like I think Hayachi and Kazuya, that can actually sidestep, like, you can intentionally do a sidestep. Um, I think those were the ones where it's like that, right? And then you can kind of actually do like 3D motion as opposed to having the screen follow you around. And Yoshimitsu can actually do it too, but the caveat is he loses health. So it's like, do you do this like cool and like useful action at the risk of your health? Can you afford to do that? And then the other thing is like Yoshimitsu, and because there's math in that, but there's also math in just every action. And one that kind of just screams math at me is like Yoshimitsu can do a spin where he just like starts spinning in a circle, already mathematical. But if you go on long enough, he will fall. So it's like if you play it right, if you time it right, you can do it in short bursts, disorient your opponent, and kind of take advantage of that pretty cool move. If you're not careful, your opponent can counter, or you can go on for too long, get dizzy, and pass out. And there's math and strategizing what you want to do with that, and math and how you're strategizing your moves in general, right? Because you're like, well, do I go on the offensive? Do I go on the defensive? Am I pressing this button? And am I pressing that button? And there's math in deciding which button you're pressing, which position it's in, how often you're pressing it, and what it does, right? And you have to have a good gauge of your character and their reach, right? Because you might be at a certain distance from your opponent, and you might be like, okay, well, let me low kick them. But then you might not be able to reach your opponent. You have to keep those sort of things in mind. And if you were to do that and miss, your opponent can take advantage of that. Grapples are an interesting thing because like you have to decide what you want to do. If someone's like blocking too much, you can go in for that, but you have to be careful because they can anticipate that and maybe it can backfire. And overall, the matches move quickly. They move so quickly. So you have to be on it. And there's math in how quick these things are flowing. There's math in how quick you're flowing. and what you want to do with everything. And I think that's really cool. And even if you don't automatically think of math that is, is something that shows up in games in general or something that shows up in fighting games, it is, right? And you're doing the math all the time. You may not always write it down, you may not always be conscious of it, but you're doing math, and I think that's really cool. And I think it's weird that we don't talk about math in gaming more, and it's something that I want to change. And at this point, I have literally hundreds of videos about math in gaming. Oh, there will be hundreds more, if not thousands. And I'm joking, but not joking on that, because I got ideas. It's just a matter of like get all out there. So with that in mind, one of the other things that I did want to talk about while we're here is the way that the backgrounds are. Like, it's an infinite background because, right, you're moving through the backgrounds and they're just like ever shifting. Like, you're never really reaching a border because it's always going back and around. And so it gives off this feel of just an infinite background, which is cool if you notice it. And in the and then there's a part at the end where you're fighting like the character Devil, which like later games you get stuff like Devil Kazuya or Devil Jin, and I feel like this is where it's starting to win. Maybe not. It might have started in Tekken because I think like Angel was a new character in this game, but not Devil. I'd have to check that one. But the idea is like in that match, a couple things are kind of cool, right? Like one, Devil does some different moves. He can even shoot a laser, and you have to adjust. But the infinite background becomes a little bit more apparent in that level because like you're seeing like a reflection of the fight that you're having, and it's going back infinite amounts, which is really cool. In any case, Tekken 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. It's in my top 20. I've had a lot of great experiences growing up with it. Going back, as far as I could tell, that was my first PlayStation game. I think I like played it over at my cousin's, like around that time it came out, and then when I was in my teenage years, I had the demo version. And for context, like demos they were interesting back then. They gave you a pretty good deal of the game for certain games. And I know like having sorry, I would go on to own Tekken 2, and I can say yeah, it didn't give you all the characters, things like that, and like all the modes, but it gave you a considerable amount of characters to play as, and I think that's pretty cool. And you kind of you get exposed to it that way, and then like playing the full game, there's a lot going on there in a good way, and also for the characters. There's more characters than there were in the first game. I think in the first game there was something like 18, 17 or 18, and in this new game there are 25. There's 10 that are playable from the start, and then 15 more that you can unlock. In the arcade version, you get these characters through updates. In the console version, that's where the unlocking comes into play, and you unlock them by playing through the arcade mode with different characters. So you're encouraged to try the different characters and beat those like stages. So there's a lot of math in determining how that all works and if it's worth your investment. And I gotta say, like it's pretty cool. And I don't feel like this video would be complete if I didn't mention that like Tekken has always had ridiculous characters in there in some form or another. I feel like it got a lot more tongue in cheek with it as it got on, but they've always been there. Like, and in Tekken 2 in particular, not only did you have like Kuma the bear, but I think like you had Alex the dinosaur with the boxing gloves, and like Roger the kangaroo with the boxing gloves. And it's just like it's ridiculous, but it's awesome. And so yeah, so Tekken is a big series, and Tekken 2 is my favorite. It took what worked about the first one, and it added in a lot of mainstays that would be in later games. And I think it's interesting that you did get something like from the console version of that game, and it's just like you get different things from getting the console version of these games, like right. And I think that's interesting because you also get something different when you go to the arcade, right? Because if you've been to an arcade, it's just like I don't know, it's a wild atmosphere, and you're playing these beast of machines, and it's an amazing experience. And on the console, it's pretty amazing too, but in a different way, right? And I think that's cool because there's math in comparing those things, and there's math in how you choose to invest your time in gaming and your money too. And gaming it is such a big passion of mine, and it's just like it's nice to see it to continue to flourish. It brings about math and art in a unique way that I am absolutely here for. I enjoy Tekken 2. If you haven't played it, I think you should. I mean, any Tekken game is like I think reasonably good, but I really do like Tekken 2. It's like it's quick paced. Um, it flows really well. It's easy to learn, but I think hard to master. Um, and it's good whether you're doing like a party game sort of thing, or if you're doing things individually. Like if you wanted to just like get on and play some game for a while, it's like hey, it's good because you gotta get in there and have fun, and it doesn't take a lot of commitment. But if you wanted to stay at it for a while, you get something out of that too. Still, anyway, Tekken 2, it's awesome. There's a lot of math in it. I'll see you in the next video. Professor Prime out.